Story number 1. I open my eyes to picture a quiet beach at dawn. The kind of morning that presses the air cool against your teeth. The waves move softly, and there's a salty chill that doesn't belong to sleep. It is December 1948, and the sand remembers more than it forgives. They call it Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia, but names are only maps, not the ground. What waits here is perplexing and full of mysteries. It leans on modern history, like a bruise that never heals. I tell myself I'm only passing through, but the shore decides otherwise. A man is found dead, and something in the posture bothers me. The body tilts against a low wall, as if listening for the tide to answer back. He has no name, only a past trimmed to nothing, and a secret that refuses to unlock for anyone who stares too long. I stand there, a stranger to the dead and to my own reasons, watching the color drain from the sky until it matches his lips. I don't believe in coincidences, not at this hour. Some stories arrive complete. Others arrive as fragments you can cut your fingers on. Here, the fragments feel curated. A suit too careful, pockets too clean. A clue that wants attention the way a lighthouse wants fog. It's not grief I feel first. It's respect. The kind you offer an opponent you can't yet see. Something planned this, I think, and something stayed to watch it happen. People talk about fate like it's a train schedule. They forget fate also chooses the platform. I picture the last steps that carried him here, feet aligning with a pattern, breath keeping time with waves, a decision looping back to its own beginning. If you listen long enough to a silent man, you start to hear your own voice making bargains. Mine says, pay attention. The paper matters. Endings announce themselves long before the words appear. Maybe that's why I can't leave. The beach tastes of distance and closed doors, and I'm the one left holding the knob that turns. I think of the poets who learned to fold an ending into a single line, then tuck it where the world can't quite look away. That's what this feels like. A performance with only one seat in the audience and a curtain that never drops. Stay with me. The shore seems to murmur, and I'll trade you answers for time you don't have. I agree to the bargain. I always do. Nights like this are the currency of my life. Quiet, careful, exact. Somewhere a book is missing a final breath. Somewhere a thumb pressed a page hard enough to bruise the paper. The sea keeps the rest. I keep the question. I arrive before the sun clears the jetty, telling myself I am only an observer, not a confessor to strangers, and tide. On the morning of December 1948, a couple strolls near Somerton Beach. Early summer warmth sticking to the skin like a cautious promise. They see the man slumped by the low stones, CO wall rough with salt, a cigarette at the collar, half smoked. The ember a tiny heartbeat that never learned the ending. I watch his shoes scrape nothing, his legs extended like a fence laid flat. The city breathes in and refuses to exhale. He is dressed tailored suit, polished shoes, a crisp tie snug at the throat. Choices that speak, choices that do not answer. To the untrained eye, I might call him a businessman at rest, maybe recovering from a late night. But the narrative does not sit right in my mouth. Time slides. The stillness grows unnatural. Footsteps hesitate. Conversation finds the edge of silence and looks over. Someone calls it in. Blue uniforms sweat. Questions form like fog. By the time I flash my credentials, the police have sketched a perimeter, and I stand at the scene. Boots careful on sand. Waves rolling nearby with the indifference of old gods. Stories that should have drifted out with the tide decide to stay. I take notes, not answers. Measuring posture, wind, and the gap between rumor and evidence like a bridge under repair. I stand just outside the rope where the sea breathes in syllables and refuses to finish a sentence. The uniforms defer, not to me, but to the questions pacing behind my eyes. The police begin their ritual with clipboards and calm voices, expecting a straightforward case, a heart attack, perhaps, or a tragic overdose. I tell myself there's comfort in templates. Then I look at the body and feel the template recoil. He looks early 40s, the kind of age that still promises detours, fit with neatly combed hair and a face that suggests quiet debts no one collected. His hands are clean, his nails manicured, his physique athletic. The beach loves an uncomplicated story. This man refuses to be one. Something curated him, I think, and something erased the curator's name. We work the clothing first. Every label on his clothing, his suit jacket, shirt, trousers, even his underwear, has been meticulously removed. A small violence committed with patient hands. I've seen spies who were messier and lovers who were crueler. Whoever did this wanted silence to extend into paperwork, to make the bureaucracy shrug. His pockets surrender small biographies. A used bus ticket in Glen Elg, a nearby suburb. An unused train ticket to Henley Beach. A pack of American-made cigarettes, rare in post-war Australia, and a comb and a stick of chewing gum. No wallet, no identification, no letters, no keys. Inventory as theology. What is present whispers. What is missing testifies. I kneel to the sand and listen the way doctors listen to lungs, waiting for a rattle of meaning. Nothing arrives. Not yet. Behind me, the sun climbs, and the crowd begins to narrate themselves as witnesses. They talk in careful circles, each sentence ending with a period they did not earn. It's almost as if this man stepped out of nowhere, sat down on the beach, and just ceased to exist. If that's theater, it's the kind that doesn't sell tickets twice. At the mortuary, the room smells of steel and decision. The autopsy, it only deepens the puzzle, too. The coroner, Dr. John Cleland, finds no obvious cause of death. No bullet wounds, no stab marks, no signs of any struggle. The body refuses to confess, so we ask the organs to translate. The man's stomach contains traces of a recent meal, like a pasty, a savory pasty common here. His spleen is enlarged, his liver is congested, and there's a small amount of blood in his stomach, suggesting internal distress. That sounds like a diagnosis until you try to live in it. We can map a river's bends. We still won't know why it chose that valley. We turn to chemistry and ask it for priesthood. But toxicology tests reveal no poison, no alcohol, no drugs. The absence is almost theatrical, like someone scrubbed the scene with intent, then left one fingerprint where no one would look. the talk becomes academic. Theories of a rare, untraceable toxin, perhaps digitalis from foxglove, or a barbiturate, terms that comfort committees and haunt families. The body, however, keeps a vanity it earned. The coroner notes, though, the man's exceptional physical condition with calf muscle, suggesting a past lived in motion. Maybe a dancer, perhaps a runner, someone who negotiated time with muscle and breath. I picture him the night before, crossing a street the way a practiced man crosses, as if timing were a language. Teeth are cartographers when names fail. His teeth, unusually shaped, are charted in hopes of identification, but no dental records match. Paperwork widens its shrug. We send fingerprints out like small ships, are taken, circulated internationally, and days later, the tide brings them back. No one claims him. Reporters gather at the edge of our patience and ask for a headline. I give them a warning instead, but they hear a story. Soon, the city learns a new name for an old ache. The Summiton Man, as the press calls him, is a ghost, a man without a past. And I, who prefer answers to elegance, am left with elegance only, and the quiet sense that the sea just won an argument I didn't know I was in. There will be more to find, I tell myself, but not the thing I want. Nights do this. They expand the space between facts until you can walk around inside the absence. I pocket my notes, look back at the slab, and promise the dead what I always promise. I'll keep asking the right questions, even if the answers are busy elsewhere. I didn't plan to return to the mortuary that week, but some cases keep a spare key under your tongue. A promise you made to the sea is still a promise. The uniforms were bored with me until the phone rang and turned their boredom into posture. A word passed down the hall, breakthrough, and everyone stood a little straighter, as if justice were about to walk in and ask for directions. They brought me the trousers like contraband, laid flat, soft as argument. A seam that looked like any other, wasn't like any other. A fingertip found the ridge, then the mouth of the secret. A hidden pocket, sewn so tight into the lining, it could have been a rumor. Inside, a cylinder, no bigger than a cigarette. Paper rolled small enough to hide a confession, big enough to change one. We unscrolled it together, the room quieting the way churches do before a vow. 2 words faced us in elegant Persian script, like a verdict delivered without a judge. 2 words, Tamam Shud. I said them out loud and felt them end twice in my mouth. A phrase that meant ended or finished. A place to set a glass down and leave the party. It had the gravity of a ritual and the charm of a dare. The lab boy flipped the page scrap under light and whistled with his breath held. He didn't know the poetry, but he knew an exit when he saw one. The old scholars would tell you it points back to a book. Arabia, the printers misspelled. The Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam. The kind of book a lonely century keeps under its pillow. Beloved for its meditation on life, love, and the inevitability of death. A deliberate clue, if I've ever seen one. A message left behind by a man who liked his endings tidy, or wanted us to think he did. Either way, somebody chose theater. The discovery electrifies the investigation. Police file the appeal. The radio swallows it and speaks our need back to us. They ask if anyone has seen a copy of the book missing its final page. And the city, God bless cities, answers when it's not supposed to. A chemist from the suburbs calls in. A copy found in the back of his unlocked car near Somerton Beach. The kind of coincidence that buys itself a new suit. We take possession. The evidence tech holds it like a guilty prayer. An old spine, fragile and superior. Inside, a scar where the last page should be. Numbers from another life, stamped faint as a blush. The book. A rare 1859 edition by Whitcomb and Toombs goes under the lamp, and the page edge says what words can't. Under magnification, the torn edge of the final page matches the tam should scrap, like two hands remembering each other in the dark. You could hear a heartbeat that wasn't a machine. Mine. Probably, but props have layers. And this one wasn't finished being interesting. There, scrolled in pencil on the inside cover, a series of letters laid out in 5 lines, almost like a code or cipher, neat, stubborn, pleased with itself. We photographed every stroke. I copied them onto the blank side of an invoice because that felt appropriately criminal. I let my eyes unfocus the way you do with constellations, waiting for Orion to pivot into an address. Nothing. Then the urge to pretend I saw something anyway. I resisted and kept reading the air. The code, as you can see, is baffling. Is it a pattern anchored to a memory? Is it a message? A phone number? A shorthand for something only the man understood? A key to the diary he never wrote? You can drown in that kind of alphabet. Trust me. We invited the clever people with clearances. Australia's cryptographers. The ones who don't put their names on doors, including military intelligence. They took a crack at it, the way surgeons take to a mystery symptom. Confident, polite, merciless. But the letters resist decryption. They do not blink. They do not apologize. Some suggest a substitution cipher. Others call it personal habit. No pattern emerges. Only the echo of effort. Nights passed. Coffee staged a coup against sleep, and won. I kept the book on my desk, at home like a lighthouse, with its light switched off. I told myself I wasn't haunted. Then I listened to the way I said it. Even today. In 2025, amateur sleuths pull the sequence into computers and prayer circles, treating the page like a map that left its country behind. Forums bloom with certainty in the dark and wake up as questions. What did he mean to tell us? What did he mean to keep? I return to the beach in the morning with the book in a plain envelope and the sea pretending not to notice. I read the quatrains under my breath, the ones about cups and endings, the ones that forgive and then don't. I think about the man built from erasures. If the word he chose was finished, then why so many openings? A pocket with a scrap of paper and a city full of listeners. A book with a torn page. Letters that refuse the simplest number of answers. Sometimes, closure is only another room, so I promise him this. I'll keep the theater lights low and the exits marked. I'll keep the evidence in order, the questions sharp, the wonder paid in cash. If there's a door hidden in these letters, we'll find the hinge. And if there isn't, if the code is only a mirror, then I'll stand here anyway, looking back at the man who asked for finished and offered us more. Phones in murder work like tides. They come in with secrets. They go out with names. That week, the evidence clerk waved me over with the book open like a throat. In the margin, graphite had left a breadcrumb darker than the rest. Order inside the mess. Intent inside the chance. We'd been hunting a closing sentence. Instead, the book offered a doorway. The book offers another clue I wrote in my notes. Not because I believed in luck, but because I respect revision. There it was, an unlisted phone number, handwritten in the same pencil that grazed those stubborn letters. Crime likes symmetry. So do poets and spies. We did what procedures require. Police trace it to a nurse named Jessica Thompson, who lives in Glen Elg, just a mile from Somerton Beach. The address put a gnaw in my stomach. The distance was an allegation all by itself. Could she hold the key to the man's identity? I tried not to answer that before the door opened. She arrived with the careful poise of someone who has practiced the truth until it sounds like porcelain. Jessica Thompson, a 27-year-old nurse. She's brought in for questioning. A neutral dress, steady shoes, a purse that seemed to apologize for existing. Her voice carried clinical light. No heat, no shadows. She's polite, but guarded, her demeanor uneasy. I told myself to watch the edges, the hands, the breath, the way a name sits in a mouth. We had the plaster ready, because timing is a language. When shown a plaster cast of the Somerton man's face, she nearly faints, her hands trembling. A tremor found her, then found the room. I saw 2 stories arrive at the same moment and refused to shake hands. She steadied, swallowed, built a wall out of posture. Yet, she insists that she doesn't know him. My pen paused, not because I doubted her, but because the sea inside the silence got louder. We worked the questions like a staircase. Her story raises suspicions. Not the kind that point, the kind that circle and wait. She admits to earning a copy of the Rabiat years earlier during the war, which she gave to an army officer named Alfred Boxall, a man she met in Sydney. The room shifted a degree colder. A title, a city, a gift. Gifts are contracts you don't read until someone dies. Protocol is a jealous god. The police tracked down Boxall, now living in New South Wales. Uniforms returned with a shrug and a photograph. He's very much alive, though, and his copy of the Rabiat is intact, with no missing pages or codes. The cleanest answer is sometimes the one that muddies everything else. If Boxall was only a page in someone else's book, then why was her pulse reading the final chapter? We took a break in the interview, the way doctors call pauses observations. She sat still, but stillness is a complicated verb. The clock told a story about regularity. Her hands told another. I thought of the number in the book, anonymous yet pointed, a shadow at the edge of this mystery, waiting to be named. Back at the table, I tried a softer lane. Childhood towns, wartime postings, how a poem finds you when you don't have a map. She gave me answers the way fog gives you shapes. Real, but only from a certain distance. Jessica's connection to the case seems to dissolve, but her nervous reaction lingers in the investigators' minds. That was the truth I could sign, not certainty. just a bruise that refused to fade. I walked her to the hall. No cuffs, no moral. People like to imagine a world where suspects wear hats labeled suspect. The real world prefers riddles. She asked, almost as an afterthought, if the body would be claimed. I lied and said yes. Sometimes mercy is a theory. She nodded as if we had confirmed rain. Then she left with the weather behind her, and the door closed with an ordinary click that felt like a verdict anyway. Night is where questions rehearse. I laid the phone record beside the cipher, then set the plaster copy on my desk, as if the dead could proofread. The math didn't work, so I recalculated the story as motive, proximity, secrecy, performance. If she goes by Joe Thompson later, if the city learns a new name for the same door, what do we call that? Escape or edit? Names change. Consequences. Read the earlier drafts. Colleagues came by with their favorite explanations rolled in their sleeves. He was a lover, one said, chasing romance like a paycheck. He was a spy, another said, chasing pattern like a mirror. I tuned them out and listened to the reliable instruments, geography, timing, and the human aversion to coincidence. The line from the book, to the number, to Jessica, to Boxall drew itself without a ruler, and still refused to be straight. Before midnight, I returned to the transcript. I traced her pauses like fingerprints. Why did she seem so shaken? What was she hiding? Not accusations, coordinates. Maybe what trembled wasn't guilt, but memory. Maybe recognition feels like falling even when the floor is 2 feet away. Maybe, too, she told the truth, and the truth wore somebody else's coat. In the weeks that followed, she receded from the paperwork the way the tide leaves a strand of kelp. Present, specific, not decisive. Jessica, who later marries and goes by Joe Thompson, remains a figure of fascination, a person the story keeps glancing at, never quite touching. The file did what files do. It fattened without getting smarter. I made a note to visit the address again when ordinary life had finished, pretending to be ordinary. On my way home, I caught myself reciting a quatrain I had no business remembering. Endings that feel like beginnings, beginnings that bow out like curtains. If the man had wanted to be found, he wouldn't have chosen this choreography. If she had wanted to be believed, she wouldn't have needed a stage. The sea kept its counsel. The book kept its number. And I kept the oldest promise in this kind of work. I'll follow the ordinary until it confesses to being strange. By morning, my coffee tasted like a cross-examination. I dialed the number again and listened to it ring in an empty room that could be anywhere. I pictured Jessica Thompson standing in a kitchen, holding a cup, inventing a calm the way cities invent mornings. The plaster face watched me the way masks do, without blinking, without permission. Somewhere in the bureaucratic night, the police printed another form that decided nothing. Somewhere closer, the sea tried to end the story and failed. A case like this never closes a door. It leaves it ajar and hires the wind. I filed the updates, locked the evidence, and let the room go dark around the 3 facts I could keep. A book, a phone number, and a woman who remains a figure of fascination, because some answers prefer to be questions that last. As we stand here in 2025, the Tamshud case remains a labyrinth without any exit. And I've learned to live with doors that open only inward. I can draw you maps of what didn't happen, list you alibis for the tide, but the ending still prefers to be rumor. This is where most stories bow. This one watches you bow and keeps standing. People ask me for the simple line, the kind that fits beneath a headline or between sips of tea. I offer them names, and the room grows quieter, the way chapels do when you stop pretending. Carl Webb. The syllables land like a partial confession. He may be the Summiton man, but his history is incomplete. Proof has edges. This story trims them smooth. I have held photographs until they argued with each other, and still the past refused to sign its name. We turned the last pages anyway. The code is silent. Silence has accents if you listen long enough. The cause of death still unknown. And there's a kind of mercy in not knowing which word exactly finished him. The nurse's secrets seemingly sealed forever. And I stopped resenting that. Not every door belongs to us. I walk the shoreline when the city forgets to be loud. The waves of Somerton Beach, they still crash, indifferent to the man who sat against that wall, his cigarette burning out as his life did. The horizon shrugs, and I understand the etiquette of unanswered prayers. In Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery, a simple gravestone marks the spot where the unknown man rests. Tourists practice reverence there. Locals practice memory. I practice both, poorly, above it. The words tome should echo. A fragment dressed as a verdict. A promise of closure that has never come. Promises, I've noticed, enjoy their distance. So I write my own. I will carry this the way the sea carries light. Imperfectly, but always forward. Do I chase theories? Of course. A good theory is a coat you put on while the weather decides. I have worn spy, lover, victim, and the heavier coats stitched from bureaucracy and chance. Each warms a different hour. Each leaves your hands exposed. And still, the night asks for toll. Some beats of truth happen off stage and refuse the curtain call. People lean toward me as if I can bless their certainty. I give them questions instead. Was he a spy, a poet, a victim, or something else entirely? The truth, like the man himself, slipped away on that December morning, leaving only questions in its wake. I think our appetite for endings is really an appetite for permission, to go on, to sleep, to rename the ache. They ask what I believe. Belief is a tool, not a verdict. But what do you think happened to the Somerton man? Was he Carl Webb, a man lost to despair, or a figure caught in a larger game? I have stood in kitchens with mothers who keep the radio low, and in garages where old paperbacks still smell like youth. And I've learned this. Grief edits memory for kindness. Mystery edits it for stamina. The next clue might be out there, waiting in a dusty book or a forgotten memory. Maybe it's a casual annotation, a postcard tucked behind an appliance, a name pronounced wrong for 70 years. Maybe it's a rumor that learned to read. Either way, it will ask a price: your certainty, your sleep, your appetite for tidy rooms. I won't pretend that hope is a method, but it is a companion worth feeding. I keep the file where I can reach it blind. I keep the mask on a shelf that forgives my dust. I keep the tide charts like appointments. And on nights when the air tastes of metal and sea, I sit with the ledger of what we know and write one more line that doesn't balance. But until then, the waves keep their secrets, and the summit man remains the man with no name. Some stories end by refusing to. This one ends by keeping you company. Story number 2. Cloaked in darkness, where the air is thick with mist and the ground beneath you shifts, soft and treacherous. I tell myself I'll keep to the channel, keep to the oars, keep to the breath counting in my chest. And then the light appears. It's the dead of night in the swamps of West Bengal. India. The stars are a rumor. The mangroves huddle like listening men in these marshes. Strange lights dance across the water. Blue, green, sometimes white, flickering like lanterns held by invisible hands. They beckon. They lure. And people like me follow, because not following feels worse. They lead to a watery grave, or they lead you home, if the swamp is in a merciful mood. These are the Allah ghost lights, and tonight I've come to learn whether they want me dead or found. My name isn't important on your map. On the river, though, men call me the one who came back twice. I carry the Sundarbans, a vast mangrove forest and delta inside my lungs, the rot of leaves, the iodine of tide, the breath of Royal Bengal tigers somewhere I cannot see. By day, the creeks pulse with life, crocodiles glide, and boatmen haggle over tea. But as night falls, the mangrove bands transform. The air presses. The silence edits you down to heartbeat and oar blade. The first time I saw them, I was a boy riding in my father's wake. He pointed with his chin, never his finger. Respect the light. Don't greet it. A faint blue glow hovering over the water, no bigger than a lantern, bobbing gently, as if a hand I couldn't see held it level. Curious, I leaned. Father did not raise his voice. He tapped my chest once, an oar to the ribs, and the pain wrote a rule in bone. Think twice before you follow. The elders say the Aliyah ghost lights, known locally as Aliyah or marsh fire, are spirits of the fishermen who drowned. Others mutter their swamp gas, born from decaying organic matter. Ignis fatuus, a fool's fire. Kaka Rafik will tell you barn owls can catch moonlight with white feathers that look like floating orbs. I've seen owls. They don't wait for you to ask a question before they answer it. I've crewed for years where the Genesis, Brahmaputra, and Meghna rivers spill into the Bay of Bengal, though the English scribes spelled them in a dozen ways to make us sound foreign in our own mouths. Out here, names dissolve in brackish breath. Fishermen navigate in small wooden boats, casting nets for their livelihood. We share tea, stories, rope, and sometimes a single match when the rain keeps secrets. We also share the rules, the rituals offered to Bon Bibi, goddess of the forest, because some debts you pay ahead of time. I pay them. I'm not brave. I'm alive. There's a metal sign at the edge of my village that says UNESCO in chipped paint. Tourists click it into their phones in the winter. The sign is true and not true. The world celebrates biodiversity. We mourn our dead. Both can live on the same nail driven into the same post. And for the 4.5 million people who live in or near the region, the lights are not a metaphor. They are weather. I have kept a ledger of names in my pocket, a private register of absences. Picture a fisherman named Arjun. The story goes, a weathered man in his 40s rowing home on a moonless night when the blue glow led him into a place where the mud held his boat like a hand. In the morning, they found only the skiff stuck in the mud. His family whispered that the Alea took him. In tea shops, the tale is some true and some embellished, but the widow counts rice, not versions. The second time I came back, the river kept a piece of my voice. That night, I learned a habit. Talk to the marsh like a person you owe money. Promise to pay. Tell it what you carry. Fish, prayers, a name you refuse to let go of. I learned another habit too. When an eerie silence settles in, broken only by the croak of the frogs or the distant splash of water, put your hand in the current. If it runs cold and fast, go home. A scientist once rode with us. A woman from Kolkata, with a camera and a study from the 1980s folded into a plastic sleeve. She spoke methane and bioluminescence, plankton and fungi, words like beads she turned on a thread. I liked her. She listened the way good boatmen listen, to the pause before a word. She said a 2023 expedition caught faint glows on film, likely gas, but their unusual persistence bothered her. If a flame refuses to die the way it should, what keeps feeding it? I had no answer fit for a paper. When I met Gopal, the night did not smell like a warning. He was returning from a long day's work with a green light hovering just above the water, moving slowly, almost playfully, pulling him away from his usual path. He said he tried to ignore it. Then, for reasons he could not explain, he followed and woke tied into mangrove roots as if the forest had braided him there. He swore off fishing at night after. I didn't mock him. I marked the tide table and folded it twice. That brings me to tonight, and to the ledger in my pocket with water-warped edges. I am rowing alone, because bravery is a poor word for what hunger makes you. The moon is a stone behind a shroud of mist. The creek narrows. The air tastes like coin. And then the light comes, an elusive glowing orb that hovers over the marshes, drifting without sound, without purpose. It seems to move, sometimes darting or drifting as if guided by something. My father's oar tap aches in my ribs after all these years. I do not point at it. I nod like you do at a neighbor you don't trust. If you want to live, I tell myself, let the light lead, without letting it choose your ending. I have a rule I pretend is wisdom. Never chase a light you didn't ask for. But rules written in comfort are cheap. Rules kept in fear are the ones that hold. The orb edges left. I hold my line. It drifts right. I let the current answer for me. Hours pass, is what people say. But out here, time is an oar stroke, repeating itself until your arms belong to the river. When the marsh wants you, it becomes patient. People from away like to place the will-o'-wisp in Europe beside the min-min light in Australia, and weigh their enchantment or doom with equal scales. I don't argue, but my tongue prefers our word, Aliyah, derived from a Bengali word meaning illusion or deception, illusion or not. Hidden mud flats are not theories, they are mouths. Sudden storms don't care whether you recite Bon Bibi's names correctly. And tigers love a certainty. A man who must land. A fog lays down. It is thick and tastes of old nets. The stars vanish. My lantern is caged like a bad idea. I anchor to the scent of diesel from the trawler, lanes far off, and to the coughing croak that belongs to a frog I have heard since childhood. The throat that says, "This is home," even when it is not safe. The orb tilts nearer. It grows brighter as I row. It does not ripple in the wind, because there is none. It dims when I approach, as if shy. It splits. No. I correct myself. My vision splits it, perhaps on the thick fog. Self-doubt is another current, at a bend named for a widow. The light sidles low and kisses the water. A line of phosphorescent plankton scribbles around my boat in answer, like children drawing around a shoe. The scientist would be delighted. I am not. This is a conversation I was not invited to. I pull in the nets. I stow the oar. I let the boat idle in the drift. And then, a distant splash of water where there should be none. Tiger or croc? The sound is too clean for the lizard kings. I whisper the names in my ledger, because saying a name out loud is a way to nail it to the air. Arjun, Gopal, my father, the boy I used to be. The Allah lights hover as if interested in attendance. When fear settles in the body, it chooses a room to sit in. Tonight, it chooses my hands. They tighten without order. I breathe in fours to buy back the tremor. In, hold, out, hold on. The orb answers, not with movement, but with patience. It sits. It waits. British administrators long ago dismissed our lights as native superstition, but they took notes well enough to name our rivers wrong. In their ledgers, the dead are alleged. Here they are practical. We do not love the dead more than others do. We simply live where they stayed. We build our houses on the muddy islands that remember their feet. I keep thinking of the Kolkata scientist and her drones and infrared cameras. She once said, "If we can map when and where the lights occur, we'll find the pattern." I wanted to ask what she would do with a pattern. Sell it a ticket? Build a fence? I wanted to tell her there are patterns that only hold because we fear them. And once you stop fearing, they let you go, and you drown. But I didn't want to break her notebook. The orb rises shoulder high and drifts toward the tangled mangroves. Here is the test. If I follow, I must commit to the arithmetic of the swamp. 1 light, 2 wrong turns, 3 prayers, 4 men to pull me free at dawn. If the boars don't find me first, if I don't follow, the river might take offense. You laugh, perhaps, but you don't live here. I give the light a bargain in the old way. I slide a coin, a useless rupee, too bent for a shop, under the bow rope. I murmur to Bon Bibi, without asking for anything specific, guide or deceive. I tell the light, but leave me a path back. People think prayers are wishes. They are contracts with vagueness. The orb inches away. I let the boat edge after, rowing closer, thinking it might be another fisherman's light. It isn't. It never is. But the lie keeps my hands from shaking. A labyrinth of winding waterways opens, the channels weaving through the tangled mangroves I can name by the taste of their mud. The light stops. I drift past it. It resumes ahead. A kindness or a cruelty arranged to look like one. There is a place the old men call the genesis of missteps. Their joke, because English is a toy in their mouths. There the mud flats are arranged like traps that are not traps, because a trap implies intention. The light leads me there. I recognize the breath of it, iron in the nose, a faint rot that makes the tongue lie to the teeth. Turn back, I think. Turn back now. I keep going. Why? Because livelihood is a holy word when the house roof leaks and the doctor wants a fee before the fever agrees to come down. Because some say these ghosts are benevolent, guiding lost travelers to safety. Others believe they are vengeful, luring the living to share their watery fate. If benevolent, I am saved. If vengeful, I am paying a debt that may not be mine. If neither, if science, then at least I will have looked my fear in the eye it doesn't have. The skiff shudders and kisses bottom. Not stuck. Not yet. The orb hangs like a thought I cannot quite finish. What do you want? I ask, out loud this time. It answers with a small indecency. It darts away against what little breath of wind there is, so you can move as you please. Good. I prefer my mysteries willful. It means I can bargain. I think of rituals before entering the swamps, of the one rule I broke tonight. Do not go alone. I think of a team from Jadavpur University, the scientists' people, who recorded faint glows and left with persistence in their notes and uncertainty in their eyes. If they could see me now, I would wave. I would say, write this down. The light appears to like the taste of my fear and slows to savor it. A distant splash again. Closer. Not tiger. Boar. The boars here wear mud like armor and charge from dense thickets with the confidence of debt collectors. The orb lowers to the water, and in it, for a breath, I see a shape not its own. A face? No. A memory of a face. Arjun or Gopal or one of the British names nobody uses at home. The swamp knows how to take your memories and play them back in a key you can't resist. The mud clutches the skiff. This time, it isn't a kiss. It is possession. I stand slowly and shift weight forward, then back, wiggling the keel the way a man loosens a stuck ring. The orb holds where it is. Not unkind, not kind. The village whispers that the Aliyah took him is a sentence people say about other people. No one wants to hear it said about their mother's son. I unship the pole and test the bottom. The mud is a liar, soft on top, iron underneath. Good leverage. I press. The boat resists, then sighs loose. I sit again, trembling, not from exertion, from the arithmetic changing in my head. If the light meant to drown me, it had its chance. Now something else is happening. Show me, I say, and the light leads me deeper into the swamp. But the current's voice changes, thin, then thicker, then thin. I realize we are skirting the edge of a channel the color of judgment. The orb aligns itself as if on a compass point that only it can see. I test the water with the pole again. 5 feet, 8, 3, a shallower vein. You're guiding me, I think. And I am ashamed of every foul thing I said about your kind in the tea shop. We make a bend that surprises me. The lone banyan that should be there is gone. Storm, lightning, or age. In its place, a dense thicket of younger mangroves stitches the bank shut. The light pauses, as if counting trees. Don't be human. I want to tell it. Humans count, and then they get the counting wrong. I smell smoke. Not my lantern. Human. A camp or a still. The orb dims, then brightens, as if sensing the same thing. We ease forward, and the channel opens into a basin where 3 boys, not men, sit with a cook fire built on a hidden mud flat that tomorrow's tide will erase. They are lost in the way pride gets you lost. They came to test themselves and found the exam was not multiple choice. Boatman, one calls, standing too fast. The flat wobbles under his feet like a table with the wrong shim. I wave him down. Sit, I say. Don't shift weight. The light drifts to the far edge of the basin and hangs there like a punctuation mark. The boys stare at it with wide eyes that make me ache with memory. You see it too? The oldest asks. I do, I say. I wish I didn't, but I do. I ferry them one by one, because adding all 3 at once would teach the mud how to smile. The orb waits, polite as a host who doesn't ask your name because it already knows it. The youngest clutches a tin of offerings for Bon Bibi, marigold pressed flat, sugar, a match that will not light tonight. He keeps looking at the orb as if it might demand a receipt. Is it swamp gas? He asks when we are mid-channel. Yes, I tell him. And no, he nods as if that helps. Maybe it does. Maybe the truth is a rope with 2 ends, and we each hold one and call it by different names. When all are aboard, I set the bow where the orb indicates. It takes us along a seam in the water, so narrow, I feel like a thief walking the fence line between 2 farms. Some claim the lights have saved them by leading them to shallower waters. Others insist they narrowly escaped death. Tonight, I am both men. We talk to keep the fear from buttering our hands. The oldest says the internet argues about our lights the way cousins argue at weddings, loudly, and with love that doesn't sound like love. He says people compare us to Naga fireballs in Thailand and to Hestalen lights in Norway, as if a name from far away makes our nights easier to sleep through. I laugh, soft. Let them, I say. Let the world put us in a shelf where we fit next to other bottles. We still have to drink ours. The orb pauses, where the channel forks into something like a choice. Left is faster. Right is kinder. I can't explain that sentence, except to a man with a pole in his hand. The light chooses right. We follow. I think of the scientist again. I decide what I will tell her if we meet. Your paper needs a column the instruments can't read. Intention. Not human, not divine, but a pressure that behaves as if it wants something. Tonight, the intention feels like guiding. Tomorrow, it may feel like deception again. We live with that. We fish anyway. Wind finally rises, a skin-thin drag on my cheek. The orb answers by lifting higher, as if to clear us of the teeth of a submerged stump. We pass a stump where men nail goddess ribbons. I touch my brow without taking a hand off the oar. The youngest notices and does the same. Good boy. The basin after the stump opens into a run. I know by smell. Diesel from the main lane. Wood smoke from the village at its end. The faintest sweetness. Jaggery? Yes, a pot boiling down sugar where a woman is teaching her niece to stir. I could cry with the ordinary of it. The orb dims to almost nothing. It is not gone. It is not needed. Some guides know when to step back. We come around the last bend, and the boys stand before I tell them not to. Their mother's light, the real kind. A lantern held by a visible hand shakes itself into view at the quay. A shout, another. The sound men make when a debt they feared comes due in their favor. I nose the skiff to the planks and let the boys climb to all the hands, reaching. Only after they are gone do I sit. Only then do I look for the light. It is there, offshore, hovering a minute more, as elusive as ever. Then it slides away, as if my story bored it. In the morning, I take the ledger of names from my pocket and set it in the sun. The pages wrinkle into a topography of survival. I add nothing, and I add something. I underlined 3 names I didn't write. The man who never returned. The one who did and would not speak. The one who laughed too loud afterward and moved inland within the week. A UNESCO officer comes by in a hat that keeps the day from arguing with his face. He asks what I saw. I tell him enough and not enough. He writes anomalous light in a box and thanks me as if gratitude were proof. The scientist is with him. She listens more than he writes. I tell her about persistence again and about intention without using that word. She nods as if she was waiting for permission to think it. What do you think they are? She asks, with the gentleness of someone who will not use my answer against me. I think, I say. The truth lies in the tension between science and story, between what we can measure and what we can feel in our bones. She smiles. It is not triumph. It is the relief of a hypothesis that knows its limits. That night, I row again. You might think I'm a fool, but the nets don't lift themselves, and the house doesn't mend its own roof. I make the offerings not just about protection, also a way of respecting the unknown. I acknowledge that some forces defy logic. The river doesn't argue. It accepts my coin and my fear and my oar in equal measure. Halfway down the channel, I see a light in the darkness. I do what my father taught. Nothing sudden. I check the current. I taste the air. I count to 4 twice. The orb, or its cousin, keeps pace on my left shoulder, like a friend who doesn't want to intrude. Are they souls of the lost, guiding or deceiving? Are they nature's illusion, a chemical trick, or are they something else? I no longer need the answer for the answer's sake. What I need is a path that leaves me with my name. I give the light the same contract as before. Guide or deceive, but leave me a path back. The words feel less like a plea and more like a habit. Habits save as many lives as prayers. When I beach the skiff at home, The boys from last night are waiting with sweets. Their mother scolds them for running with a hot tray. The youngest asks, "Will the light come again?" "Yes," I say. They will keep dancing. That is what they do. He looks disappointed, as if mystery should learn to take a day off. I ruffle his hair and accept a sweet that burns my fingers and blesses my tongue. Later, when the house sleeps and the frogs edit the night back down to its bones, I open the ledger and add a single word that is not a name. Returned. I do not underline it. I do not date it. Some entries should not be pinned too tightly to the calendar. If you come here, keep your bargains small and your gratitude large. Keep your hand in the current. Keep a coin under the bow rope. And if the Alia ghost lights find you, do not ask for answers. Ask for a path and for the patience to walk it. Because here, in the Sundarbans, where life and death dance as closely as the tides, the river remembers who tries to master it and who learns to listen. And the lights, they beckon, they lure. Sometimes they save. Often they simply are. I have made my peace with that. I row anyway. Story number 3. I was born on water and worry. On good nights, the tide tucks me in. On bad nights, it drags old names to my door. Tonight, it brings the Goddards. The coast smells like iron and salt. And the gulls circle, as if they know confessions don't float. Somewhere out there, a silence is holding its breath. I cue the recording light and speak into the dark, because stories like this aren't told to crowds. They're told to whoever stays up late enough to hear them. Stay with me. They were a family first, a mystery second. But mysteries, like currents, don't ask permission. This is the story of the Goddard family, who set out from Saint Malo, France, in 1999 for a sailing holiday and disappeared. I say, letting the words taste of brine and questions that haunt the Brittany coast to this day. Saint Malo looks harmless at noon. A picturesque port town on France's Brittany coast, where stone walls guard a history of pirates and explorers. I've walked those stones. They hold heat and secrets. The wind there files every statement down to a rumor. And rumor is what I'm left with most nights. They were 4. Yes, a 43-year-old doctor, his wife Mary France, and their children, Camille and Marius. Small hands and bigger plans. He rented a 26-foot catamaran named Nick, a boat meant for postcards and naps, not autopsies and court files. They packed the ordinary armor of a week away, snacks, toys, and sleeping bags, the kind of items that feel insufficient once the sea decides to test you. The harbor buzzes with tourists, cameras up, sunscreen thick. Everyone convinced the ocean is a blue hallway that always leads you back home. As Nick sails out, no one suspects that this will be the Goddards' final voyage. That's the way tragedies like to begin, with sunlight, with gulls arguing over nothing, with a sea that sparkles, as if polishing the door you're about to walk through. I keep my voice steady and let the facts row out ahead of me. Now imagine that journey turning into a nightmare, your boat vanishing into the waves, leaving only fragments of a life and a mystery that chills to the bone. The line belongs to the case file and to the night, both. and the night takes it personally. You don't need a storm to disappear. You just need the sea to decide you're small. Tracing every clue, every theory, and the silence of a sea that refuses to speak. I promise the listener. I've learned not to demand answers. I ask better questions and listen to what does not arrive. The late 90s cast a calm that wasn't a time of relative calm, the papers wrote, while beneath the surface, tensions simmer. Families pack for holidays. Debts and doubts pack themselves. A doctor brings both hands and hopes on board. But hope doesn't count as ballast. I picture the English Canal, a busy waterway, ferries like patient beetles, nets going down, rumors coming up. The water here files bodies and truths under the same blue cabinet. Out there, a boat called Nick carries a family into a sentence without a period, and the ocean learns a new way to spell their name. Days pass, and the Goddards don't return to St. Marlow. That's how the tide keeps time here, by absence. I picture the apartment where mail surrenders to a slot and collects like silt. By September 5th, the phone rings and doesn't deliver the voices it owes. Mary France's mother answers to a hollow, puts on a coat she keeps for bad weather, and walks next door to look at a locked door that looks back at her. She does the bravest, most ordinary thing. She alerts the authorities. Paperwork begins to breathe. Radios wake up. The case shrugs off sleep and becomes a ritual repeated across coasts. A massive search begins across the English Canal, the kind you see from cliffs and think that many bright jackets must equal a happy ending. The call sheets list both French and British Coast Guards, add helicopters and naval ships, and still, the water writes its own minutes. From the studio, I can feel that grid of effort stretching out over gray water. Search patterns, fuel calculations, coffee cooling in paper cups. But early clues are scattered. That's the thing about the sea. It breaks narratives into confetti and gives them back out of order. On September 2nd, before the worry had a name, a lifeboat from Nick washes ashore near Dinard. Empty. Empty boats are the worst witnesses. They never contradict you, and they never help. Fishermen report finding items in the sea. A line in a logbook. A shrug with calloused hands. A net tipped out. They turn up a credit card, the family sleeping bags, a child's toy, and the channel breathes as if unimpressed. Each item carries the temperature of a hand that isn't there to claim it. It's not a trail, it's an argument with the tide that the tide keeps winning. Everything drifts aimlessly, unless you're the family that needs drift to mean destination. Hope is a scientist with bad data. I've seen whole towns feed it like a beloved stray. I've watched hope scratch at locked doors until its paws were raw. In St. Malo, binoculars multiply and rumors take root like dune grass. Nick was spotted. Then maybe. Then someone thought. In a pub off the quay, two sailors angle their chairs toward a window and swear by the compass of their memory. The channel doesn't object. It never does. Then June comes with a kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. A boat pulls up a fragment that should have remained folded inside time. That's where euphemism usually begins. Remains. Findings. confirmation. But when you say a child's name, euphemism breaks. The file gets a new weight, and the air in the room changes forever. Forensics step carefully, because the floor has become a place where language can slip. They give us numbers and likelihoods, and a margin of error so small you can't pass a prayer through it. Grief isn't a straight line. It's a tide graph. It recedes just enough for a mother to stand, then returns to her throat. In the studio, I keep my voice low when I reach this part, because the dark is listening and deserves respect. Camille's name sits on the desk between the microphone and my notes until the notes stop mattering. The channel holds what it wants, and when it returns something, it's never a gift. Years move the way fog moves, sideways, quiet, certain. 2006 drags its finger across the seabed and finds more truth than anyone asked for. Bones don't argue. They narrow stories. They set limits on speculation the way a shoreline sets limits on boats. But even as more pieces surface, the map refuses to fill in. A mother and a small boy remain unaccounted for. A hull refuses to announce its grave. The word closure keeps trying to join the conversation and keeps getting shown the door back on land. The searchers return their borrowed hope. Maps are rolled and rubber banded. The invoices for fuel and sandwiches are filed, because bureaucracy is how societies cope with the unbearable. I walk the quay at dusk, rehearsing the way we talk about miracles when they don't arrive. The gulls argue about nothing, and part of me wants to pick a fight with the horizon. But the work doesn't allow that. The work asks me to make room for uncertainty without letting it eat the story. In the house where the Goddards were supposed to return, plants lean toward a window they won't see open again. The answering machine's red light is a heartbeat without a body. Neighbors invent small tasks, taking out a trash bag that isn't full, watering a plant that isn't thirsty, standing in a doorway as if the doorway might confess. The city continues. Mail, milk, school bells, and every continued thing feels like a betrayal. At night, I rewind the day and listen for anything that sounds like a thread we missed. The channel has 1,000 ways to explain itself without telling the truth. Weather reports start speaking in code. Tides that always behaved suddenly act like teenagers. On the desk is a list of what we know and what we don't. The first is short. The second is an ocean. I try to say their names. Yves, Marie-France, Camille, Marius, without letting my voice become a funeral. I fail, and I forgive myself, and I try again. The search teaches a lesson cruel enough to qualify as wisdom. Sometimes the sea doesn't answer. It assigns homework. We comb archives, knock on doors, pull at threads that fray into smaller threads. The lifeboat sits under a blue tarp in a secure lot, mute as ever. The toy, the card, the blankets, they migrate from evidence bins to exhibits and sometimes back again, as if movement could become meaning. Out in the channel, ferries keep their schedules like alibis. If there is a mercy in all this, it's small and private. A firefighter wipes salt from his eyelids before calling home. A diver checks a glove for the 3rd time because ritual is a form of care. A clerk double staples a report so it won't slip loose in a drawer. These are the ways we argue that lives matter, even when the water refuses to debate us. By the time the sun yields to the lighthouse, the case has shifted in tone. We started with a rescue. We find ourselves whispering around a crime. The water hasn't changed. We have. And that's the cruelest weather of all. Cases like this collect theories the way peers collect barnacles. People need cause the way lungs need air. But cause gets slippery when soaked in salt. So what happened to the Goddard family? The microphone doesn't answer, so I keep asking. The leading theory favored by French police leans into gravity, the trouble closest to home. It cast Yavez as the killer, they say, the man who kissed foreheads, signed school forms, checked pulses, now recast as the hand that closed the book. Money rattled in the walls, financial troubles, and marital strife that drove him to murder. Sometimes the shortest distance between 2 points is a wound. In that telling, the voyage becomes a final chapter. The ocean, an accomplice, the paperwork, a eulogy dressed as procedure. The script continues. Sinking Nick to hide the crime. The channel would oblige. Its depth is a patient liar. But the next lines don't cooperate. There's the missing boat and bodies, and I keep circling the question that scrapes the hull every time. Why no wreckage in a busy channel? Ferries with eyes, radars like winter constellations, fishermen drawing grids with their nets. Somebody should have tripped over a secret by now. So the story breeds a sibling. Another theory suggests a mob hit. Money again. But this time, it wears different shoes. A debt speaks a dialect learned in ports and backrooms. Debts enforced on water, because water erases footprints. There are whispers that someone knows a man who knows a dock at the wrong hour. The current is a courier. If professional hands were involved, they would count tides the way bankers count interest and accept that the channel makes a fine shredder. Science tries to straighten the page and gets poetry for its trouble. The Mojave sand and mixed heritage, DNA, nudge the map outward, point past Brittany, west and farther west. Maybe an international connection, maybe a hired killer. Theories begin to stamp their passports. Crosswinds pick up. Phones ring with accents. The story tries on a dozen jackets and looks guilty in all of them. Of course, there's always the thief in any missing person's tale. The trickster with a mirror. A staged disappearance. A boat sails out full and returns as a rumor. A family fractures into the artifacts of a life, then into the vocabulary of speculation. But staged vanishing acts require immaculate timing and cooperative physics. They don't leave bones with dates attached. They don't leave love behind in a house, like a coat you meant to wear. Evidence has the personality of rain, voluminous yet evasive. On the hard drive, a clock keeps its own counsel. We see keystrokes that shouldn't exist. The computer activity that suggests a presence after absence. A hand on a mouse when another hand should have still been steering a boat. You can draw a timeline on the wall until it looks like modern art. The channel will not clap. There's a door I don't open often in the studio. Folklore. The word belongs to firesides and festivals, not to bones and chain of custody forms. And yet it waits like a shadow in any coastal town. People here keep a drawer of stories where science hasn't paid the power bill. The channel has earned its myths. It collects them the way it collects anchors. I don't live there, but I know the address. Folklore. It's where you go when the facts are late. Between the neat paragraphs of police reports lives the less neat reality of people trying and failing and trying again. The detective who can quote the Beaufort scale by heart. The lab tech who knows how grief walks. The harbor master with a memory for tides, the way some men remember birthdays. When I talk to them, the theories lose their swagger and become what they are. Scaffolds that let us climb high enough to see how much we still can't reach. If Eves is the villain, the story becomes grimly symmetrical. A man who healed pain with needles deciding, one night, to end it with something heavier. If criminals are the culprits, the tale becomes a ledger with names redacted, paid in cash and silence. If it's neither, if the ocean is both stage and culprit, then we have to admit that nature can be terrible without malice, that it can take and never once feel sorry. I'm not immune to edges that gleam. The American desert in a French file reads like a dare. The DNA that points past borders hums like a wire under your feet. But I also know that cases can be haunted by the artifacts of their own investigation. Contaminants, coincidences, the seductive architecture of a theory that clicks too neatly into place. The mind loves puzzles that solve themselves. The sea hates them. So what do? I return to the small, stubborn facts. The family walked down a dock. A boat left a harbor. Items later came back without their owners. Words were typed when they shouldn't have been. Bones were found that were not supposed to be. 2 names remained unreturned. The boat learned to keep a secret. The channel maintained its reputation for discretion. In this late hour, I offer no verdict, only a posture, alert, patient, unwilling to be satisfied by anything that fits, because it fits. When people ask why I keep telling this story, I tell them that some mysteries aren't puzzles, they're places. You don't solve a coastline. You learn its weather. You remember its losses. You speak the names the tide can't spit back. If you're listening in a car pulled over by the sea, look out there for a moment. Not to find a boat, but to understand the size of the witness we're cross-examining. If you're at a kitchen table, put your hand over the wood and feel how far wood is from water, and how easy it is to believe distance is safety. If you're in bed, let the dark be large enough to include unanswered questions without choking on them. Tomorrow, someone will suggest a new thing they think the sand means. Someone else will dream up a cave nobody checked. Another diver will line up weather windows and hope the channel is in a forgiving mood. I'll check my notes and add a line that has the same shape as every other line. We do not know yet. Sometimes that is the most honest sentence in any language. Theories will keep circling like gulls. The case will keep refusing to be the meal. And I, stubborn as a lighthouse, will keep turning. Because turning is how light works, and how some stories ask to be told. I step outside the studio and let the night breathe through the rigging. The harbor lights blink like tired eyes, and somewhere beyond them, a distance refuses to shorten. And as we stand here in 2025, the Goddard family case remains a ghost on the Brittany coast. That sentence has lived on my desk long enough to become furniture. But it still makes the room colder when I read it aloud. Its answers lost in the waves. The words arrive like a tide table, precise, indifferent, inevitable. I try to talk about evidence, and the dark keeps asking for prayer. Were ye Mary France, Camille, and Marius victims of a family tragedy? The question is a lighthouse that rotates across every theory we've built. Turn, and it washes over a criminal plot or something stranger. Turn again, and it swings back to the kitchen table no one set that night, the soft toys no one gathered, the front door that learned a new definition of silence. We inventory the unreturned. The blood in their home, Camille's skull, Evasa's bones, and the missing Nick form a puzzle with no edges. There's a cruelty in edgeless puzzles. They promise completion and outlaw it in the same breath. I stand by the railing and listen to the channel say nothing in 100 dialects. The sea, vast and indifferent. It isn't cruel. It's busy. It keeps everything, anchors, storms, and secrets, with the same calm efficiency. When people ask why I'm gentle with the ocean, I tell them I've seen what happens when you shout at water. It doesn't yell back. It waits. It holds the truth. But it's a truth that may never surface. And yet, we keep sending viewers questions, microphones. That's our species. We throw our curiosity like rope and hope that something on the other end decides to hold. I walk the quay until the boards start to memorize my steps. The restaurants are cleaning their windows. The ferries are making up reasons to be late. Out past the breakwater, a catamaran from another story hums home, alive and unremarkable. And for a second, the universe feels like a practical joke performed without malice. We take attendance, the boats that came back, the boat that didn't. I imagine a different ledger. Columns labeled kindness rendered, stubbornness applied, luck borrowed. In the kindness column, the volunteer who kept checking the weather just in case. A neighbor who watered plants for months longer than hope suggested. In stubbornness, the detectives who re-asked old questions as if the language had changed overnight. The analyst who drew a new grid because the sea kept cheating on the last one. In luck, well, luck is the guest that doesn't RSVP. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know I won't pretend to close what hasn't opened. I can describe the doorframe, the missing paint where a hand once gripped, the hinge that squeaks when the wind swings through. But I won't claim to see the room. The families of the missing don't need poetry. They need mornings that don't argue with them. They need the sound of keys in a lock that means exactly what it used to mean. So here's the promise I can make. Thin and durable as fishing line. We won't graduate from this case. We'll audit it forever. Every few months, a new letter will arrive. A new theory will try on a coat. Someone will swear they saw a hull where no hull belongs. Someone else will build a calendar out of winds and point to a date as if dates could be magnets. We'll consider each with care, not because we believe each, but because respect wears that uniform. And if there is an answer waiting, I hope it understands the size of the room that's been left for it. All these years, entire neighborhoods have carved out a table setting for truth. Chairs sit empty on purpose. The first toast has been rehearsed in whispers. Don't mistake that for obsession. Call it hospitality for the living and the lost, on my desk, amid tide charts and transcripts. There's a single photo of Saint Malo in morning light. The stones keep their patience. The sea rehearses the day's only sermon. I think of Yves's hands, steady from clinic work, and of Marie France, laughing at something small and non-negotiably good, like a child's inventiveness or a gull stealing a fry and looking proud about it. I think of Camille holding on to a rail that felt like certainty, of Marius doing the arithmetic of clouds. These are the unindicted truths. People ask me off-air what I believe. I give them 3 answers and let them pick. First, that the sea sometimes eats stories because it doesn't recognize them as stories. Second, that human cruelty is a resource we pretend not to mine. Third, that love does not end at waterline. It stands on the mole and waits, and somehow continues to be love, even when love becomes only waiting. If this feels like a prayer, that's because it is. Not for miracles, though I wouldn't return one at the counter. For clarity, for someone somewhere to remember one overlooked hour, the way a lighthouse remembers every turn. For a piece of truth to wash up with enough of itself intact that we can stop calling it driftwood. Until then, I'll keep the light on in here. I'll say their names like weather, part of the landscape, not an intrusion upon it. I'll ask the channel, respectfully, repeatedly, to share a single correct sentence. And when it doesn't, I'll come back tomorrow and ask again with the same voice, because that's how a promise survives. You and I, we're not jurors tonight. We're witnesses to an absence that refuses to be quiet. We owe it the small good work of attention. We owe it the discipline of telling the truth about not knowing. We owe it the courage to move carefully through a story that has already broken enough. And so I end where I began, with a coast and a question. If the sea is a library with most of its catalog underwater, maybe we're the ones who learn to read by feel. Maybe the sentence we need is already written and simply very deep. Either way, I'll be here, turning the pages by moonlight, listening for whatever rises next. Story number 4. I remember the moment the ocean turned into a sheet of ink and the stars felt close enough to touch. Something was waiting up there. They told me the vast ocean could stretch a man thin. Mind first, then metal. They were right. Soaring through the twilight sky, I watched the Bass Strait become a dark, endless void. My instruments were steady. My faith was not. Then came a strange light, hovering, metallic, impossibly fast. I knew aircraft. This wasn't one of them. It's not an aircraft, I said into a radio that would soon belong to the sea. And then everything changed. I took off into a clean Australian dusk with a pocket full of borrowed courage and a checklist I could recite in my sleep. They'd say later I was young, that I was a 20-year-old with 150 hours of experience and a knack for asking the sky for favors. They'd say Melbourne was a city at my back and the Bass Strait at my feet. That Murabon airport looked like a toy field in the rear mirror of the world. I only remember the weight of the headset and the way the weather behaved like a well-trained dog. I wasn't alone. At least, not in the way people mean it. I had company in the form of a Cessna 182L. blue and white, a good plane with a patient soul. I had a route, a 235-mile round trip to King Island, and a story of picking up passengers that sounded ordinary even to me. I had fuel for 5 hours, life jackets, and a radio beacon that believed in second chances. I had UFO fever, tucked like a newspaper under my arm, the ink staining my fingers from close encounters and late-night meetings with men who loved the word phenomena more than they loved sleep. But my true companion was the night. That twilight that turns the sky into something that looks like courage. At 4,500 feet, 44 miles from Cape Otway, I keyed the mic and asked Melbourne Flight Service if there was any known traffic below 5,000. The controller, a voice I'd later memorize like scripture, said no traffic. And then it arrived. A large aircraft with 4 bright lights that wasn't an aircraft at all. "It's orbiting on top of me," I said. "It's playing some sort of a game. The first rule of fear is that it keeps its hands where you can't see them." I kept my scan tight, waited for the lie that would make this sensible. But the object refused to speak aviation. It moved so fast, its landing lights pulsed erratically, and its surface looked metallic. Not chrome sleek, but something older, like a memory polished by 1,000 unblinking eyes. I thought about Venus, about stars, about the ways the human brain loves to see patterns and ghosts. The pattern loved me back. The Australian Department of Transport would later say spatial disorientation. They'd write 1982 on the file and Bermuda Triangle of Australia in the margins only in whispers. But then, in the living moment, I could tell my voice was calm but curious. I asked for sense and received green glowing nonsense in return. Around me, the Bass Strait behaved like a secret. Men have drowned in secrets. Over 100 ships and several planes had gone under here since the 19th century, and the water never bothered to keep souvenirs. Somewhere behind me, Australia wore rock music and flared jeans like a costume. UFO sightings were logged across Victoria, fishermen murmuring about glowing orbs, a farmer about a disc-shaped craft, a pilot about strange lights. I didn't need their stories then. I had my own. Something slid along my spine, cold, deliberate, patient. I banked. The object matched. I leveled. It hovered, closer now. Green lights pulsing like a heartbeat I wished was mine. "It's not an aircraft," I repeated. And in that line, I heard a version of myself I'd never met. A man who had lost the ceremony of doubt. I felt the intimacy of being seen by something that measured me in units my bones couldn't name. Then the scrape. A metallic scraping sound, like metal grinding on metal. For 17 seconds, that felt like the mechanical equivalent of a confession. I braced, hands on yoke, eyes on gauges, breath counting the arithmetic of panic. This is the part where you trust training. This is also the part where training looks back at you and shrugs. They say afterward, no oil slick, no debris, no signal. They say the search lasted a week. 1,000 square miles, ships, helicopters, planes, all the nouns we use when we want to believe in recovery. They say the Cape Otway photo showed a blurred, elongated shape with a green glow. They say the Air Force logged no aircraft in the area. They say many things. The sea says nothing. As for me, I could still smell avgas and hear the radio breathing in my ear. Delta Sierra Juliet, I called, because names can keep a man from vanishing if he says them often enough. The controller asked if I could identify it. Identification is a small church. This visitor didn't worship there. It's not an aircraft, I said again. And even the static leaned forward to listen. I wasn't built for suicide. I wasn't built for cover-ups or secret test craft. I was built for altitude, checklists, the soft persistence of instruments, and the small pride of doing a difficult thing correctly. I had failed examinations before, yes, and the world had failed me back a time or two. But I wasn't courting oblivion. I was courting a landing on King Island and the plain, decent work of picking up passengers who would call me Fred. But the night had different plans and better timing. Afterward, they would parade explanations like tired horses, Venus mistaken for a craft, meteor, upside-down flight, spiral dive. It is a kindness humans do for themselves, naming things until they can be filed. The official report used words like disorientation, calm weather, no evidence of collision. And somewhere behind the words, behind the desk, a man with a pen must have wondered whether a metallic sound, unlike anything in aviation, was just the machinery of grief. Meanwhile, 10 sightings hung over Victoria, like lanterns that refused to go out. Fishermen said the orbs were green and erratic. A pilot said strange lights nearby. A farmer swore disc-shaped truth into the dirt. UFO researchers passed around the photograph, argued exposure and elongation, and in the end, they held a picture of a question. If you ask me, I'll tell you the Bass Strait itself is an accomplice. Its currents fierce, its storms sudden, its depth up to 500 feet. It knows how to keep secrets with fierce silence. Ships like the Charleston and a Beechcraft in 1972 had already learned the alphabet of its appetite. I learned a consonant or two myself. This is where you expect certainty. You expect the voice to deliver a verdict, because that's what late-night voices do. Close circles. But the green, glowing object, the metallic scrape, and the empty sea won't let me. They insist on an unfinished sentence. There's a version of the story where I was abducted, taken, rather than lost, as my father would say. In that version, the craft hovers, its lights blinding. Something reaches down with impossibly fast tenderness, and the sky folds like a map. There's a version where I flipped and spiraled, where the wreckage is lost to the strait's depths. There's even a whispered version where a military cover-up and a secret test craft pair their shadows. Each version wears the same cologne. No proof. I can give you artifacts instead of answers. The radio log, the precise time, 7 p. 7:12 p.m. 17 seconds of metallic sound. I can give you a controller named Steve Roby, the syllables of Delta Sierra Juliet, and my calm, detailed voice until it wasn't. I can give you no oil slick, no debris, no beacon, no body. I can give you a culture marinated in UFO mania, Hollywood serving close encounters, and Australia wearing isolation like a crown. I can give you a young pilot who loved the stars just enough to trust them. If you need something practical, take this. Your mind is a magician that does its best work when the horizon leans and the gauges glow. It will tell you a star is a craft, and a craft is a salvation. It will turn a clean night into a game and keep score with your blood pressure. It will, sometimes, be right. And what of the Cape Otway photo? Let's say it is exactly what it looks like. A blurred, elongated shape with a green glow. Let's also say analysis is a ladder that sometimes leans against the wrong wall. Between those truths is where belief goes to warm its hands. I keep circling the sound. That metal grinding on metal. A scraping that had no right to be where it was. You don't hear that in a Cessna on a calm night, unless the sky decided to add a page to the checklist. I have replayed 17 seconds so long, they have become my middle name. They called the Bass Strait a treacherous stretch. I call it patient. They called King Island a speck of land. I call it a promise I didn't keep. They called me boyish. I call myself the man in the seat who chose altitude over explanations until one chose me back. There is a doctrine to nights like that. It says, the stars are your only guide until a strange light appears. It says, you will swear it is not a star, not anything you know. It says, in an instant, you're gone, and all that remains is a crackling radio call with your name inside it, like a note in a bottle. The doctrine isn't written, it's flown. I have tried to reconstruct the cockpit as a cathedral of small certainties. Instruments glowing faintly, radio crackling, the controller's voice like a rope. The craft circles, orbits, plays a game, moves so fast it unthreads your definition of speed. Green lights pulse, metal glints, landing lights erratic, and you reach for the comfort of identification and find the shelf empty. This is where the breath shortens and the focus narrows to a point as fine as a needle. I have tried to bless the official stance for doing the polite work of closure. 1982 needed that. Records needed that. Aviation needed that. But the 10 sightings, the missing plane, the metallic sound, and the absence of wreckage are unruly parishioners. They stand in the aisle and hum something not of this world until the sermon forgets its notes. Maybe the truth is this. The strait keeps its secrets, and the stars above still shine, silent witnesses to a night that changed everything. Maybe it is not an aircraft is less a conclusion than a key that opens a door to a room where we do not yet have names for the furniture. I want to tell you, I landed. I want to tell you, Fred Valentik signed a logbook, shook hands with passengers, and slipped into 1978 like a coin into a machine that always pays out. But the green glowing object, the metallic scrape, and the empty sea stand shoulder to shoulder and say no. So here is what I can offer from 2025. If you cross the Bass Strait tonight, if the twilight is kind and the weather calm, if your Cessna hums like a promise, carry both skepticism and wonder in equal measure. Do not surrender one to feed the other. When a strange light appears and the radio grows crackling, say your name clearly. Say your altitude. Say your heading. And if you must, say, it's not an aircraft. You'll be right whether it is or isn't. And if, like me, you find yourself swallowed by the night. Know that the next light in the night sky is not necessarily your enemy. It might be an answer, or another question, or something we cannot imagine. Either way, the doctrine holds. The Bass Strait will keep its secrets. And some dreams are lost to the stars, not as failures, but as invitations. That is my final transmission. I leave you with a question mark written in the heavens, with a radio call that still echoes across the years, and with a young man's dream that decided to measure itself against the unknown and accepted the terms. Delta Sierra Juliet, out.